The valley was silent when the human explorers first came across it. High mountains surrounded the place, their peaks cutting into the gray clouds. The air smelled of dust and old iron, but buried deep in the stone was something stranger. At first glance, it looked like a massive broken hull, a twisted skeleton of metal left to rot. It was darker than any stone around it, its surface scarred with burns that no fire on Earth could have caused. For generations, people living near the valley told stories of strange lights, of thunder without storm, of shapes moving under the ground. Most thought it was only folklore, but now the wreck was before them, half buried in silence, waiting for someone to notice. The explorers had not expected to find anything of value. When the broken starship was revealed by a landslide, even the most curious scientists laughed at first. It looked dead, as if it had been left to decay for thousands of years. The metal was cracked, its strange designs unreadable, and no energy pulsed within. To the eyes of men, it was a ruin with no future. Yet there was one among them who did not laugh. A quiet engineer, with dirt on his hands and a mind that always asked questions, stepped closer and placed his palm on the cold surface. The others mocked him, calling it a worthless husk, but when his skin touched the hull, a faint vibration hummed beneath his hand. It was as if the ship had been holding its breath for centuries and now exhaled. The engineer pulled back, his heart racing. None of the others had felt it. He pressed his hand again, and once more the faint hum answered. It was weak but real. A ship that should have been empty still carried something inside it. His eyes narrowed, and he knew at once this wreck was no ordinary ruin. He did not speak of it loudly, fearing the others would dismiss him as a dreamer. Instead, he began to study in silence, tracing every scar, every piece of broken frame, trying to imagine the hands that had built it. In time, he found marks that told him a story. The ship had not crashed, at least not in the way human machines would. The burns were not from Earth's weapons, but from alien firepower. The edges of the hull carried signatures of plasma strikes, weapons too advanced to belong to humanity. Whoever had built this ship had fought a battle above Earth and left this broken warrior to die on the surface. The thought sent chills down his spine. If aliens had been here once, what had become of them, and why had they abandoned the wreck? The answer came slowly. Hidden under the ship's surface, deep within its silent body, were signs of tampering. Panels had been forced open, wires ripped out, circuits shattered with purpose. This was not a ship that had simply fallen. It had been abandoned. Its creators had given up on it, tearing out what they could use and leaving the rest behind. To them it must have seemed useless, a broken tool not worth repairing. The humans around the engineer agreed with this conclusion. They saw no life in it, no treasure, no power. They began to speak of selling pieces for scrap, turning history into profit. But the engineer refused. He begged them to wait, to let him study it further. Against their mocking, he spent nights alone by the wreck, sleeping under its shadow, listening to the hum that only he seemed to hear. The sound was like a heartbeat, faint and distant, yet steady. He began to wonder if the ship was more than a machine. Perhaps it was waiting for something or someone. He tested wires, rebuilt small fragments, and slowly the hum grew clearer. It was not his imagination. There was life inside the corpse of this ship, buried but not gone. One night, while he worked with nothing but a lantern to guide him, the valley trembled. The hum rose suddenly into a low echo carrying through the rocks. Dust fell from the cliffs above, and the lantern flickered. The engineer stepped back, his chest tight with fear and wonder. The wreck was not dead. It was responding to him. He shouted for the others, but by the time they arrived, the hum had gone silent again. They laughed once more, saying he had lost his mind. Yet deep in his soul, the engineer knew the truth. Machines do not breathe, but this one had. The discovery weighed on him. The thought of a machine that only humans could awaken filled him with questions. Why would aliens abandon such a ship? Why did it answer to human touch? He could not explain it, but he could feel the wreck's silent call. He began to dream of stars, of battles, of voices not his own whispering through the metal. The ship was speaking to him in a language beyond words. It was old, broken, and forgotten, but not gone. The other explorers eventually grew tired of the valley. They left, leaving the engineer behind with his obsession. Alone under the mountains, he stood before the wreck, his hands trembling as he reached out once more. When his palm pressed against the hull, the hum returned, stronger this time, almost alive. A faint glow spread across the cracks of the ship, thin lines of light that pulsed like veins. His breath caught in his throat. The wreck was awakening, and as the glow spread, he understood a terrible truth. The aliens had not abandoned the ship because it was worthless. They had abandoned it because it did not belong to them anymore. The nights in the valley grew longer, but the engineer did not leave the side of the wreck. He had built a shelter near its shadow, nothing more than a shack of wood and iron, but he spent every waking hour at the ship. The world outside thought him a fool. Newspapers called the discovery a hoax. Scientists dismissed the wreck as a piece of dead metal, and governments showed no interest. But he could not let go. Something in his heart told him this ship had been waiting not for the aliens who had built it, but for someone else. Each time he touched the hull, the hum grew clearer, as if it was learning the rhythm of his heartbeat. He brought tools from the city, crude by comparison to the advanced systems hidden in the ship. But he worked tirelessly. He studied its wiring, its broken circuits, its strange crystalline structures that pulsed faintly in the dark. He discovered that his own machines, though primitive, could feed energy back into the alien veins. When he connected a simple generator, the wreck groaned and responded with faint lights, as if it was tasting electricity for the first time in centuries. The glow was weak, fading after moments, but it was enough to prove the truth. The ship was not dead. It was asleep, and he had begun to wake it. One night, as storm clouds gathered over the valley, thunder shook the cliffs and rain poured down in heavy sheets. The engineer stayed at the wreck, working in the storm, refusing to leave. Lightning struck the mountains and the ground trembled with fire. At that moment, the wreck responded to the storm. Its broken body drank in the raw power of the skies, absorbing the lightning into its wounded frame. For a breathless moment, the entire hull lit up with blinding energy, casting shadows that danced across the valley walls. The engineer fell to his knees in awe as the wreck shuddered, as though taking its first breath after a long sleep. When the storm ended, the glow faded, but the hum remained. Louder now, steady and alive. The ship was no longer silent. Something within its core had awakened. The engineer pressed his hand to the metal and felt it beating like a living heart. He whispered words of wonder, and in that instant the ship whispered back, not in language but in a rush of images. Stars, fire, endless black skies, battles fought against enemies unknown. He staggered back, his mind burning with visions, his soul marked by something greater than himself. The next morning, he called others to witness. Scientists, engineers, military officers, all came to the valley when they saw his desperate message. They laughed at him at first, but when he touched the ship and the glow returned, their faces turned pale. Some stepped forward to try for themselves, but the ship did not answer them. It remained silent under their hands, lifeless as stone. Only when the engineer touched it again did it hum, as if it recognized him and only him. Fear spread among the visitors. The whispers began. Was the ship cursed, or worse, was it choosing him? The government seized the site soon after. Soldiers came, surrounding the valley with fences and steel, taking control of what they thought was their prize. The engineer was forced into silence, his discovery stolen by men in uniforms who believed power could be taken by force. They brought their strongest machines, their brightest scientists, and tried to open the wreck. They drilled into its surface, they wired it to vast power plants, they struck it with weapons and fire, but the wreck refused them. It remained silent, as if mocking their efforts. Days turned into weeks and frustration grew. In secret, the engineer was brought back. They wanted answers, and he was the only one who had touched the living heart of the wreck. With careful steps, he placed his hand on the hull once more, and before the eyes of soldiers and scientists, the hum returned. The ship glowed faintly, answering only to him. Gasps filled the air, and the whispers turned into fear. This was no ordinary machine. It was a vessel with its own will. It had rejected its alien masters, and now it rejected the strangers who sought to control it. Only one man it accepted, the man whose hands were scarred with work, whose heart beat with determination. The officers demanded that he show them how to awaken it fully. They threatened, they promised riches, they begged, but he had no clear answer. The ship was not obeying commands, it was responding to something deeper, something human. He worked again, connecting wires, building crude systems, feeding energy into the veins of the wreck. And slowly, before their eyes, the Starship began to stir. Panels shifted with the sound of grinding stone, lights blinked along its fractured frame, and the earth itself trembled as though the valley could no longer contain the sleeping beast. From deep within, a low rumble rose, and the sky above seemed to darken in answer. Soldiers fell back, their weapons ready, but no weapon could prepare them for what was coming. The wreck was no longer a wreck. It was awakening. The air grew heavy with energy as the ship pulled itself together, broken pieces sliding into place as if time itself was reversing. Wires reconnected, armor sealed, and the glow within its core spread outward like fire through veins of glass. The engineer stood at its side, his face lit by the rising light, his hands trembling not with fear but with awe. He felt the pulse stronger than ever, a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat, as though the ship and he were bound together. The officers stared in silence, realizing the truth. The aliens had not abandoned a worthless machine. They had abandoned a weapon they could no longer control. And now, in the hands of humans, it was returning to life. The valley was no longer silent. Weeks of secret work had filled it with noise, with engines humming, with men shouting orders, with machines dragging cables across the broken ground. The wreck was now alive, glowing faintly at night like a slumbering beast under the stars. Soldiers stood guard with weapons ready. Scientists argued over charts, and engineers tried to map what none of them could truly understand. Yet all of it meant nothing without the man the ship had chosen. Whenever he stepped away, the wreck dimmed as if drifting back into sleep. Whenever he returned, it stirred, humming in rhythm to his presence. No one could explain it, but none could deny it. The first true sign came one morning when he was ordered to enter the ship. The officers wanted proof that it could still function, proof that it was more than a glowing ruin. He stepped through the fractured hull, walking into corridors that were too large, too smooth, too alien to feel real. The walls pulsed faintly with light, showing him the way, guiding him deeper. Dust fell with every step, but the ship seemed to rebuild itself as he moved, smoothing the cracks, sealing the wounds. By the time he reached what seemed to be the heart of the vessel, the ship was alive with light. A chamber opened before him, filled with seats not built for humans, yet strangely welcoming. The control system shimmered with symbols no one on Earth could read. But when he reached out, the panels shifted, their shapes twisting until they matched human hands. His breath caught in his throat. The ship was changing for him, adapting to him. He sat down, and at once the chamber shook with a deep groan. Outside, soldiers scrambled, shouting in panic as the ship's engines roared to life. The valley shook with power not felt since ancient storms. The ground split, rocks crumbled, and a bright light flared from beneath the wreck as if the earth itself was being torn apart. Dust and smoke rose in thick clouds, hiding everything from view, until a sound unlike any ever heard on Earth split the sky. With a deafening blast, the ship lifted from the valley floor, rising slowly at first, then faster, tearing free of the mountain's grasp. The humans outside stared upward in disbelief. What had been a broken ruin only weeks before was now floating above them, glowing brighter with every second. Its engines left no fire, no smoke, only pure light that shimmered across the valley. Soldiers dropped their weapons, scientists cried out in awe, and the officers who had claimed control of the wreck could only watch as their prize rose beyond their reach. Inside the ship, the man felt his heart beating wildly. He could feel the ship's pulse matching his own, guiding his movements, whispering through his thoughts. He was not piloting it, he was part of it, bound to it by something deeper than control. He leaned forward, and the ship surged higher, breaking through the clouds with a speed that pressed him into his seat. In moments, Earth's sky gave way to the endless black of space. Stars spread before him, sharp and clear, brighter than he had ever seen. For the first time in human history, a man sat inside an alien warship that had accepted him as its own. But he was not alone in the void. The ship's sensors stirred, showing him visions of movement beyond Earth's orbit. Strange vessels drifted in the darkness, silent and waiting. At first he thought they were ghosts of memory, fragments of the ship's past, but then he realized the truth. Scouts from the race that had abandoned the wreck had returned. They had come to see what had become of their lost warship. The alien vessels were sleek and sharp, built with precision, radiating menace. Their weapons hummed with deadly light, aimed directly at the reborn ship. The man's breath caught as warnings filled his mind, the ship screaming of danger, of threats that had once destroyed it. Yet something inside the core pulsed stronger, fiercer than before. The ship was not afraid. It had chosen its side. The first shot came in silence, a beam of light tearing across the black. The ship shuddered as the blast struck its hull, but instead of breaking, its armor flared with brilliant light, scattering the energy like rain against stone. The man felt the impact ripple through his bones, but the ship steadied itself. answering with a roar of power. Panels shifted before him, forming weapons that hummed with energy older than humanity itself. He did not know how to fire them, but he did not need to. The ship knew. Light surged outward faster than thought, striking the nearest alien scout. The vessel shattered in silence, fragments spinning into the endless night. The others moved in panic, but the human starship danced among them, faster and stronger than it had ever been before. Each blast of alien fire was turned aside. Each strike from the ship answered with devastating power. Within moments, the void was littered with burning wrecks, silent reminders of a fleet that had underestimated Earth. On the ground below, humans stared upward at streaks of light flashing across the sky. They did not know what was happening, but they could feel it in their hearts. Something was changing. Humanity had risen beyond the ground, beyond the atmosphere, into the stars, carried by a ship that had once been thrown away. When the last alien scout was destroyed, silence returned to the void. The man sat in the glowing chamber, his chest heaving with breath, his eyes fixed on the endless stars before him. He had just fought a battle with a ship he barely understood, yet somehow it had obeyed him, protected him, trusted him, and deep within its core he felt something more. A bond that could not be broken. The ship was not only his, it was humanity's. Together they had taken the first flight, and the galaxy had taken notice. The world below had seen lights in the sky, but few understood what had truly happened that night. Rumors spread like fire, whispers of an alien machine that had awakened under human hands, of a battle fought beyond the clouds that left trails of fire across the stars. Governments demanded answers. Scientists begged for evidence, but the truth was locked within one man and the starship that had chosen him. He returned to Earth in silence, the massive vessel descending like a dark sun over the valley, its glow shaking the hearts of all who saw it. Soldiers who once tried to control it now lowered their heads in awe, for they knew it no longer belonged to them. It belonged to something greater. Inside the ship, the man walked its corridors as if he were no longer a stranger. The walls no longer felt alien. They shifted to his presence, adapting to him, reshaping themselves into forms humans could use. Passageways widened to match his steps. Panels displayed symbols he could understand, and every hum of the engines echoed like a living heartbeat. The ship was learning from him, and he was learning from it. Day after day he worked, fusing human machines into alien systems. Generators, satellites, even broken weapons from Earth were drawn into the ship and remade. What humanity lacked in technology, it gave in creativity, in stubbornness, in the refusal to surrender. The ship took all of it and grew stronger. The officers who once commanded the valley watched helplessly as the ship changed. They had thought to master it with force, but instead they saw a bond forming, a trust no order could command. Slowly they began to understand. This was not a weapon to be seized. It was a force that demanded respect. Governments tried to interfere, sending orders, sending envoys, even threats, but each time the man stepped into the ship, their power dissolved. The wreck they had called worthless had become Earth's most valuable treasure, and it would answer to no one but him. Weeks turned into months, and the ship was no longer a broken ruin. It was reborn, its body sealed, its engines blazing with power that reached beyond human science. It trained itself with him, showing him visions of battles long past, of strategies, of tactics, as if teaching him how to wield the power it carried. Weapons that had once been silent now roared with energy, and shields that had failed against alien fire now flared like unbreakable walls. Humanity had never seen such strength, and for the first time, they believed they could stand against the galaxy itself. But the galaxy was already moving. The scouts that had been destroyed were not forgotten. Their destruction was a warning carried across the stars, and it reached the ears of those who had abandoned the ship long ago. They returned not with scouts but with fleets, armadas stretching across the void, bristling with weapons designed to erase worlds. They came not in curiosity this time, but in fury, for what they had once dismissed as worthless had risen again, and worse, it was no longer theirs. The man stood in the valley as the sky filled with streaks of fire, ships breaking through the atmosphere like falling stars. Earth trembled under their arrival. Cities shook, and humanity faced a truth it had always feared. They were not alone, and the ones who had come were not friends. Yet in the shadow of fear, the man stepped into the ship once more. The walls closed around him, The hum grew louder, and together they rose to meet the threat. The first fleet descended with weapons blazing, intent on destroying the ship before it could rise. But this time the ship did not hesitate. Shields flared like burning suns, scattering the rain of plasma fire. The man felt the rhythm of battle pulse through him, his hands guiding systems that moved faster than thought. The ship surged upward, weaving between blasts, returning fire with energy that split the skies. The fleet broke apart under the storm, ships exploding in silence, their wreckage falling like meteors into the oceans below. Humanity watched from the ground as their skies became a battlefield. Fear turned to wonder, wonder turned to pride. For the first time in history, they saw their world defended not by weakness, but by strength that rivaled the stars. The ship fought not as a relic of alien power, but as a weapon born anew through human will. Every strike it made was faster, stronger, more ruthless than before because it had learned from its failures, and it had learned from the man who guided it. In orbit, the battle raged on. Fleet after fleet arrived, but each one shattered under the fury of the unstoppable force. The ship adapted with every fight, reshaping its weapons, adjusting its shields, countering strategies before the enemy could strike. The aliens who had once dismissed it as worthless now faced a truth they could not accept. The machine they had abandoned had found a new master, and it had become greater than they had ever imagined. When the last enemy vessel fell, the void grew silent once more. The man stood in the heart of the ship, his hands trembling, his eyes fixed on the stars beyond. He knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy had seen what Earth could become. The ship had shown its power, and now every world, every empire, every race that once believed humanity was weak would know fear. The valley that once held a broken wreck was now a monument to something far greater. Humanity had taken what others called worthless and turned it into unstoppable strength. The bond between man and ship had rewritten destiny, and the galaxy would never be the same. The battlefield in orbit had grown silent, littered with fragments of ships that once belonged to an empire far older than Earth itself. Fires burned in the void, silent streaks of light drifting endlessly through the black, and the wreckage of alien pride now circled the planet like a broken crown. On the ground below, humanity looked upward with a mixture of terror and awe. What they had witnessed would be told for generations, stories of blazing light, of a starship that had risen from the Earth to defend its people against enemies from the stars. But for the man inside the ship, the silence was heavier than victory. He could feel the ship pulsing, not with exhaustion but with warning. This was not the end, it was the beginning. He sat within the glowing chamber, the control panels breathing with light, his heartbeat still racing in time with the ship's own rhythm. The battle had been won, but the whispers in his mind showed him visions beyond Earth. He saw star systems burning, he saw fleets gathering, he saw councils of alien races whispering in fear and anger. The destruction of the enemy fleet had echoed across the galaxy, a message louder than words. Humanity had risen, and the weapon they had abandoned had become something no one could ignore. The galaxy would not look away. Back on Earth, governments that had once mocked the valley now scrambled for control. Leaders argued over who should command the ship, who should own the weapon that had turned aside an armada. Military officers planned strategies, corporations dreamed of power, and scientists demanded access to secrets buried in the alien hull. But when they came to the valley, when they stood before the ship, it did not answer them. It did not even stir. Only when the man returned, weary and scarred, did its hum rise again, its lights flicker, its engines breathe. Humanity began to understand the truth. The ship was not a tool to be seized, not a prize to be divided. It was alive in ways no one could explain, and it had chosen. The man who had found it tried to speak of peace, of unity, of preparing not for conquest, but for defense. He warned that the galaxy was watching, that more enemies would come, greater than those already defeated. But his words were drowned by greed and fear. Nations armed themselves, mistrust spreading faster than hope. Some dreamed of using the ship to conquer their rivals. Others feared it would fall into the wrong hands. The valley became a fortress of iron and walls, soldiers posted at every cliff, aircraft circling overhead. Humanity was divided, standing at the edge of greatness and ruin. But the ship remained calm. Its hum grew steady, a heartbeat echoing across the valley, whispering in ways only the man could hear. It did not care for human quarrels nor for their greed. It was not bound by their laws or their chains. It had chosen humanity, but not through leaders or governments. It had chosen the spirit of survival, of resilience, of the hands that had repaired it when all others had given up. When the man entered the ship once more, it opened to him fully, revealing depths he had not yet seen. Great chambers unfolded, weapons older than memory shimmered with new light. Engines that had once been silent now thundered with energy. The ship was no longer a ruin reborn. It was something greater, something that even its creators had never intended. When the next wave of enemies came, it was not a single fleet. It was a coalition, a gathering of alien powers who had once mocked Earth as primitive, now united in fear of the weapon they had abandoned. They came in silence, stretching across the stars, determined to end the threat before it could grow. Humanity prepared in panic, knowing their armies were small, their weapons weak, their defenses fragile. Yet when the sky once again burned with alien fire, the ship rose from the valley like a storm-given form. It did not rise alone, for in the time since its awakening, the man had trained others, pilots, engineers, soldiers, thinkers. He had brought them into the ship one by one, letting them feel its hum, letting it know their hearts. At first it had resisted, answering only to him, but over time it began to accept them, recognizing the same human spark that had drawn it to him. When the fleet descended, the ship was no longer a vessel for one man. It was a vessel for humanity. The battle that followed was unlike any before. The alien coalition came with overwhelming force, their ships vast and countless, their weapons forged from centuries of conquest. Yet the ship danced among them, faster, stronger, fiercer than anything they had faced. Its shields turned aside storms of fire, its weapons carved through ships larger than cities. And every strike was guided by human hands filled with courage and fury. The galaxy had underestimated Earth, believing them fragile, believing them weak. But the humans fought not with tradition or arrogance, but with creativity, with desperation, with the unbreakable will to survive. And the ship learned from them, adapting with each battle, growing sharper, deadlier, unstoppable. Hours turned into days, and the sky above Earth burned with war. But when the dust settled, when the last alien vessel was shattered, silence returned. Earth was scarred, but it still stood. Humanity had not only survived, they had triumphed. The galaxy now knew a truth it could not deny. The ship they had abandoned was no longer theirs. It was Earth's, and the humans who had once been ignored, dismissed, underestimated, had become a force no empire could overlook. The man stood once more in the heart of the ship, his hands resting on the glowing panels, his eyes fixed on the stars. Around him, his crew, the first crew of Earth's greatest vessel, watched with the same fire in their eyes. They had faced death and had risen stronger. They had turned the worthless into the unstoppable. They had become a voice the galaxy would hear forever, and as the ship hummed, as its glow filled the chamber, he understood the truth that had been waiting since the beginning. The aliens had not truly abandoned the ship. It had been waiting all along for humanity, for the hands that would mend it, for the hearts that would guide it, for the courage that would make it more than a weapon. It had been waiting for Earth.